I'm Bernie O'Rourke, Extension Youth Livestock Specialist with the University of Wisconsin Extension and the University of Wisconsin Animal Sciences Department. Part of the educational process for youth enrolled in meat animal projects is to gain knowledge about their project as a food animal. This is a critical piece of the learning process and gives youth the skills to improve their project for future years by the information gained. Capturing this information assigns a value to the animal based on industry standards. One of the ways we gain information on animals as a food product is by collecting carcass information. This is done by taking measurements on the carcass of the animal by a judge. The majority of the county fairs in Wisconsin utilize the collection of actual measurements, although utilizing ultrasound to collect carcass data is done by some county fairs. Ultrasound is a technology that can capture carcass measurements such as back fat and loin muscle area without harvesting the animal. Although there are many pros and cons to using either carcass data or ultrasound, the important thing is being able to capture data and then being able to interpret what it means. In ultrasound, a technician will capture an image from the live animal in the same location where carcass information is collected. It produces an image from the ultrasound machine shown here. The technician will then use this image to estimate the back fat, loin muscle area, and in beef, a quality grade. Here is Ron Russsell, Senior Lecturer with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Animal Sciences Department, to explain the carcass data and what it means.
In lamb carcass evaluation, we have to do a consideration as far as the amount of lean and the amount of fat that our carcasses have. Lamb carcasses on a quality side, the quality is really not a very critical factor because virtually all of our lambs that we evaluate are young, and so therefore they have desirable textural properties to the meat, and so lamb quality really doesn't play a role. The biggest factor that we'll rank lamb carcasses on is on composition, is on lean to fat ratio or overall muscling and trimness of the carcass. So to do an assessment of lamb muscling and trimness, we'll look at the overall fat distribution on a carcass. We'll look at the fatness over the leg. We'll look at the fatness through the loin region. We'll look at fat over the rack, also known as the rib. And we'll look at fatness over the shoulder. We'll do that on every lamb just to try to do a complete assessment of the fatness of the lambs. We'll take two critical measurements on the fatness of lambs by measuring the amount of fat right over the top of the ribeye muscle. Is one measurement we'll take, and then the other measurement we'll take is what's called a body wall thickness. And so to measure fat thickness, for example on this lamb, we'd measure it right here at halfway around the ribeye muscle, and we push all the way into the muscle itself, and we'll measure the very outside of the fat, and commonly we'll measure one side, and then we'll measure the other side. And different judges have different approaches, but one popular approach is to measure the two sides and take an average of those, where some judges will in fact say that the greater of the two is a measurement that they'll use because it may more accurately assess the amount of fatness on the lamb. The other measurement we'll do is what's called the body wall thickness. The body wall thickness is measured 5 inches from this midline or this center point on the lamb around the perimeter. And so if I go 5 inches out here, we'd measure the body wall, and it's all the way from the inside of the body itself all the way to the outside of the fat. So for example, this lamb would measure 1.05 for body wall, and that goes with its fat measurement, which is just over 0.2 of an inch, so more like a 0.22 fat measurement. And so that's how we'd measure the fatness of the lamb. To measure muscling in the lamb, one of our popular approaches, well, one of the dominant approach is to measure the ribeye area, the amount of muscle in the lamb. We'll do that by using the lamb grid. Each dot is a half of a tenth of a square inch. So we'll lay the grid right on there, We just count the dots that are inside my pre-drawn 2-inch area, and then I'll count the dots that are outside of that pre-drawn area that also are part of the muscle, and getting the difference between those two, I can come up with the amount of loin area or ribeye area that I've got. So for example, on this particular lamb, I've got 1 dot, 2, 3, 4. I've got 4 dots that are in my pre-drawn 2-inch area that are not touching muscle, so I'll take those away from the overall measurement. On the outside of that pre-drawn area, but contributing to the area of the muscle, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I've got 8 dots that contribute to the area, 4 that didn't, so my difference is 4. And so I've actually got, since each dot is a 1/2 of an inch, 4 dots make 2/10 of an inch, I've got a 2.2 square inch ribeye on this particular lamb. Not an overly impressively muscled lamb. Okay? So that's one measure of muscling. The other measure of muscling that we'll do is we'll look at a leg conformation or a leg score. And for that, we'll make an assignment just based on the overall volume and shape of muscling, thickness through the center of the leg, thickness and width down into the sirloin region, width through the stifle regions of the lamb. We'll just do an overall composite score that's assigned to the lambs on the basis of just their overall leg conformation. So when we get done then, we'll take fat thickness, body wall thickness, ribeye area, and leg score, or leg conformation, and we'll put those into a formula for what we call a lamb carcass index. And in general, the lambs that have the higher index will be those that are heavily muscled and that are trim, and those will be our lambs that rank higher. And so in a comparison of these two lambs, we've got two that are kind of vastly different. The lamb on your right is appreciably trimmer over the ribeye area. It has less body wall thickness. It also has a larger ribeye area. And leg conformation, it's got more thickness and volume of muscling through the center of the leg. And so this lamb would have an appreciably higher lamb carcass index than this one. And so we would rank these carcasses, we'd rank the lamb number 2 over number 1 in this case, in this particular comparison. Now, a critical factor we have in lambs is whether or not they have adequate cover. This lamb certainly has plenty of finish on it, and in some regards too much. This lamb's a little bit more questionable, and what lamb carcass evaluators will do is they'll do an assessment of whether or not the lamb has sufficient fat covering to protect the lamb carcass. And this lamb carcass is probably on the trim side, but it would still be what we would consider to be adequate as far as fatness. It's got what we would adjust to being about 1/1500ths of an inch of fat over the ribeye. It's got a body wall thickness of about 6500ths or 7/10ths. And so just in an overall evaluation, because we do have fat covering over the loin and fat covering over the rest of the rib, the fact that this is a little bit narrow here, we would probably go ahead and not worry about too much. We'd adjust this to be sufficient in its fat cover, and again, we'd leave this lamb in. But if the lambs get much trimmer than this, if we don't have adequate cover to protect that carcass from dehydration and keep it stable, we'll go ahead and discount those lambs a little bit and move them down in any kind of a lamb carcass ranking. So this set of carcasses we prefer greatly, this carcass number 2 over number 1, because it's got more desirable overall carcass composition, and it's got more muscling, and it's trimmer. Another factor that we will consider in terms of carcass composition, in addition to lamb carcass index, is we can calculate this term that's called BCTRC, and that stands for boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts. And that's just another form. It's more along the lines of percent lean in pigs. But what it does is we take into account for that, we'll take fat thickness, body wall, and ribeye area will be used in a formula along with carcass weight. And what that does is that predicts or projects the amount of boneless retail product from the carcass that we'll get as a retail yield. And so that also gives us a good idea, or very good idea, of which carcass will yield a greater percentage of lean, edible, retail, wholesome product.